Alright, so I had a few people ask me to weigh in on the D&D playtest process and where we are with everything now. And as you may know if you follow this channel, the last playtest package, the Druid and the Paladin, left me sort of disillusioned with the playtest, and I haven't really covered the new playtest at all. But I've had time to look it over really thoroughly. I've had time to watch other people's takes on it. I've had time to formulate my own opinions on it as well. So what I want to cover in this video is basically the whole naming thing with 1D&D or D&D 5 or whatever we're going to call it. And I want to cover, of course, the playtest package 5 specifically. And then I also want to talk about where I see the playtest leading to, what is really the future of D&D from what we've been seeing in the last few months. First off, we just had a video where Wizards of the Coast or Jeremy Crawford tried to explain why we're going to call it D&D 2024. We're going to refer to it as the Player's Handbook 2024 version and so on, instead of just calling it 1D&D as was initially the thought. And I have to say, for me personally, I don't like the idea of having to always say Player's Handbook 2024 when I'm referring to a specific version or the newest version of the game. I think it's much smoother to just have another name for it, even if Wizards of the Coast really wanted to be 5e still. And I can understand that. We sell 5e books, links to those in the description down below, and it's better for us if it's just 5e, continuing 5e. That'll help us sell the books that we already have. But I still think you could do something where you would call it 5.1, or you would call it 5.5, or you would call it 5R for revised, for example, or 5X for extra, or whatever. That aside, semantic issue, I know, not a huge deal in terms of what we're actually seeing for the gameplay and what are we seeing from the gameplay. So playtest package 5 included a lot of stuff. Most notably, weapon properties. We got some spells as well, and then we got 5 classes: the Barbarian, the Fighter, the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Wizard. And then we also had a rules glossary update. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to give you my overall thoughts on each element and then to kind of sum up where I think that leaves us. First off, there's the weapon properties. They've given weapons these sort of specialties, whatever, where you can do extra stuff with them. You can deal a bit of extra damage. You can give a creature disadvantage. You can knock them prone. You can do stuff that is maybe perhaps useful in combat. Maybe it's not prone, maybe it's shove away. Whatever it is, these are minor weapon features that some classes will get access to, and in specific we see that the Barbarian and the Fighter are going to get access to them, and the Fighter is going to get access to more of these properties. There's some Intra balance issues where some of the features are really clearly more powerful than other features. There's the Nick feature, I think it was, where you deal extra damage even on a miss. There's the one where you get advantage on your next attack. These features are probably a good deal better than some of the other features, so I would want them to sort of even out the balance between the features, because otherwise it's going to be like you have to pick these 2 or 3 features. The other 5 features are not going to be worth your time. Now, my issue with these are they're being like sort of touted like the second coming of Christ for martial characters. The martial caster divide is going to be gone because now martial characters can deal 2 extra damage, and that's really kind of what they do. It's for the most part a flat damage boost. It's not something that's going to really affect the battlefield a whole lot. There are a few of them that do, but not in a really significant way, I think. This is a good step. This is a step in the right direction, definitely, but it's not a big enough step, and it's not as big a step as I think they would like us to believe. But overall, this is a good change. It's a good change. It's a change that needs to be like sort of polished up a bit and brought to the right place, but it can be really good. No doubt about it. All right, second up, we have the Barbarian, and overall, not much to say about the Barbarian. It's been buffed. There's the dexterity saving throws feature has been buffed. It comes in a bit later, I think, but it's buffed. The brutal critical feature, stuff like that, those are better and less confusing now. Overall, you can look at the Barbarian we get here and say, okay, this is a better Barbarian than it was before. Now, is it a much better Barbarian than we had before? No, it is not. It's not a much better Barbarian. And there are some of the features that I don't think make any sense, even though it's nice to have them, but the thought that you can use your rage and your strength to stealth better, for example, that's a really weird one for me. So good changes for the Barbarian overall. I have to compliment Wizards of the Coast with this. I don't think they did anything too crazy here. Then there's the Fighter. The Fighter also got a lot of buffs. They get access to these weapon property things, and they get more access to them than other classes, it would seem. And they also get a much better Indomitable, where it's actually like you add your Fighter level to, that's gonna make for certain successes later in the game. So that is a very good buff, but it is a late game buff, and not all characters get to the late game. Beyond that, they're also getting some of their features a bit earlier, so they'll get earlier access to their 4th attack. They'll get earlier access to stuff like improved action search, and action search has also been reined in, so it's not you can cast another spell this turn kind of thing, which is great because it wasn't really the purpose of the thing. It was to make more attacks, and that's what it's most useful for now. I can't complain about the fighter getting buffs. Now, are these enough? No, I don't think so. I think we should have gone more of the Battlemaster is baked into the core class kind of thing instead of or on top of these weapon properties. But they opted for weapon properties sort of being the buff for martial characters as a whole, and then tweaking some of the buttons on the Barbarian and the Fighter. It sort of also has to do with what are we getting for the Arcane classes, and that's the next thing, because we have the Sorcerer coming up. Now the Sorcerer as well got a lot of buffs. So basically the Sorcerer is getting more spells, it's getting more spells at level 1, it's getting more spells at later levels, it's getting more spells known, and that was a huge request from people. Do I think they needed it per se? No, I maybe thought that we should bring some of the other Arcane classes down a bit instead, but more on that later. Sorcerer also get more metamagic options. They get more at earlier levels, they get more at later levels, and they also get the option to recover some of them, so more daily uses of metamagic, and that's fun because metamagic was a fun part of being a sorcerer, and only having access to 2 for so many levels before was a real downside and real downer. So getting access to more and having more options, that's just great. Then you also get some new Sorcerer Spells they've sort of baked up, and these are, in my opinion, kind of weird, kind of very Sorcerer specific. Like, it'll only be Sorcerers using them because they use spell points, most of them, which is like, why are these not class features, and why do they need to be spells? It sort of kind of seems a bit weird. And then at level 18 we get what I would consider a real capstone feature for the Sorcerer, because they get sort of a free baked in wish that is going to be always available for them, and they can even use this to cast a spell of any level using the spell slot of that level, so they can just conjure up any spell they want at any time of 1st to 8th level, or once per day at least. So again, just buffs all around for the Sorcerer, for the Barbarian, and for the Fighter. And now we get on to one of the probably more controversial ones, and that's the Warlock, because the Warlock has been completely overhauled. The Warlock has been taken away from short rest spell slots and just giving a normal half-caster spell progression. So that means, well, spells are going to come in at much slower, much lower levels, but instead their Arcane Invocation thingy, or their Mystic Arcanum, sorry, that was the one, has been changed, so they can sort of pick that up as an invocation, and that's going to give them access to higher level spell slots or ordinary full caster spell slots when they take that invocation. I really don't like the changes to the Warlock. It sort of shoehorns them into picking up these invocations for Mystic Arcanum, because otherwise they're gonna not be as good. These having high level spells is just that great, so you sort of need them. It also just plops the Warlock into more or less the Arcane spell list, so now they don't have their own little unique kind of vibe for the spell list, they just have the standard spell list, and then it shoehorns them into picking up Eldritch Blast and Hex, and I don't really mind that Hex is sort of now a spell that is a class feature. It's just like, either make it a spell that is optional or make it a class feature, and that's the whole features as spell things I want to discuss a bit more. There are some good changes here as well. There are some changes to how packs are going to work. You're going to pick them up at 1st level. They're going to add some features. I think those are nice changes, but overall the whole thought that we're going to do the Warlock completely differently now, but still it's not even that. It's not even that. If they just taken the Warlock and made it a full caster, I could understand it. I'd say, okay, well, yeah, it was fun while it lasted. We tried the short rest thingy, but now they're just full casters like other full casters. And for me, that would have been fine. Not necessarily change I wanted. I would rather want them to fix short rests and like tell us when can we use short rests. Make some ground rules for short resting that would just make the Warlock balanced and make all other short rest dependent classes balanced. I could have seen them gone an entirely different route, where they had said, okay, we're not going to have any spellcasting on the Warlock baked in. These are going to be all invocation styles. That's more like the 3.5 version of the Warlock, I believe, where you would not have spellcasting as any other, but you picked up these invocations and they would let you like spam spells. You could cast them over and over. So that's where you pick up your Eldritch Blast, or maybe you got your Eldritch Blast baked in, I can't remember. But anyway, you pick up spells through these, and now you can cast Disguise Self at will. Now you can cast Fly at will. Now you can cast Invisibility at will, stuff like that. But the way they gone here, I just don't like overall. Is it a buff or is it a nerf? Very hard to tell. I think it might be a slight buff. but it's not a fun one for me. And I'm not sure that it's a buff. It probably is because they have access to a wider spell list now. They have much better spell selection, and with the Mystic Arcanums that they can sort of just pick up. But in the end, if you're going to play your Warlock like that, why not just play a Sorcerer maybe with the meta magic and stuff you're going to be able to do? The appeal of the Warlock sort of disappears for me when it becomes this weird amalgamation of a half caster and a full caster, and to me it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So yeah, that brings us to the Wizard, and it should probably come as no surprise, but it's still somewhat kind of surprising for me that they actually buffed the Wizard, and they didn't just buff it a little, they buffed it a lot. They give it stuff like ribbon features. Academic it's not a huge impactful feature, but it's just another feature for the Wizard. Hey, yeah, were you missing some features? Here's another feature. We know you can cast all the spells in the game, basically, but why not have some more versatility baked in? Then they get access to some new spells where it's there's Scribe spell, which is like you can scribe something into your spell book, but now it's a spell to scribe it. They get stuff like Memorize spell, and then they get some really broken ones, which are Modify spell, Create spell. Because if you look at Modify spell, you can go in and you can say, oh, my concentration can't be broken, or this spell affects only my enemies, so now Hypnotic Pattern is just an AoE mega incapacitating thingy that's gonna be just broken. I would say on my initial reading of it was like, okay, now we're doing something creative, now we're doing something new for the game. This was one of the first features in this whole playtest where I was like, okay, this is interesting, but it's also broken. Do you want to maybe try and preserve it and then tone it down, make sure that it's not broken? I think there's a potential to do that, but I would have loved for Wizards to sort of do that before they present it, because now it's probably going to get a lot of negative feedback. People are going to say, okay, I don't like this feature, it was broken as hell, and the Wizards are going to scrap it and leave it in the dust, and we're never going to see it again. That's a potential outcome at least, and I think the potential for this kind of feature is great and fun, and sort of the stuff that makes D&D worth playing. I can create my own spells, that's really cool, but it's also something where we need to see it in a more final form to be able to judge it, to truly judge it as we should be. It has to be balanced when we see it, or at least somewhat balanced, and this isn't. My overall thoughts here are that there's a lot of good stuff. There's the barbarian buffs, there's the fighter buffs, there's the weapon properties, maybe not in the final thing we're seeing here, but sort of the idea behind it is a good one. I like some of the sorcerer changes. I think those will make a sorcerer more fun to play. I really don't like the warlock changes, not at least the way we're seeing them right now. And I really don't like that they have buffed the Wizard. There are some cool thoughts here, but they are also just unbalanced, and the Wizard really don't need it. And that's the crux of it for me. That's the Martial Caster Divide. And yeah, I know you're tired of hearing it. You've been hearing so much about the Martial Caster Divide, but it is a real thing where Wizards and Sorcerers and Warlocks and whatever can do so much, and Fighters and Barbarians can do so little. And not to get too much into the Martial Caster Divide, but it's basically a two-legged issue where we have the out of combat, this sort of exploration and social interaction thingy, and then you have the combat on the mechanical sort of what can I do to be effective when we are fighting the big bad guy. And this one over here, the mechanical, the combat thing, that's one where that's actually, I think, not too difficult to bridge. I think there are a lot of stuff we can do to bridge that. It's the other one that's also going to be very difficult, and I think that Wizards of the Coast have really done neither. They've done a little work on both, but then they undo all of that work they do buffing the Barbarian and the Fighter by going in and then buffing the Wizard and the Sorcerer and the Warlock maybe as well. And in terms of the whole battle, what can we do in combat thingy, we really need some AoE, some control, and some mobility for the Barbarians and the Fighters and the other master classes. That's really what they need to compare to the Wizard. We can't just give them a bit more damage with the weapon properties. We have to give them the ability to impact the battlefield in a noticeable way. We have to give them the ability to deal out damage in an AoE more effectively, or something like that. And that could involve like spell-like features. You make this samurai attack that deals a lot of damage, and some players don't like that. I really kind of don't like that either, maybe not for all characters at least. So the other way you can approach this is to nerf the spellcasters, and I think that's a necessary step. I don't think it's the step they're going to take, but I think it's a step they should take. I think we need to have less spell slots on the spellcasters. I think there are some spells that need to be toned down, and I'm looking at stuff like Fireball, for example. Does it really need to do that much damage? And there are also, and I think that's probably maybe the biggest thing also about the in combat thing, is that Wizards and Sorcerers and other classes like that, they have so huge defensive capabilities compared to what they had in previous editions, where they were also stronger, it should be said. But it's now, they still have a D6 hit die. It was a D4 before, so that's more hit points. They have so easy access to heavy armor and AC, stuff like that, so it's not like they're falling behind. They even have a shield spell, which we are yet to see if they're going to fix that. So their defensive capabilities is just so big. They're not that much less tanky than a fighter or a barbarian. So something where opportunity tags are given out to monsters if they are near a wizard that casts a spell, for example, that would be a step in the right direction. Variation of arcane spell failure, which was a thing in 3.5e, where a wizard or an arcane spellcaster wearing armor would have a chance to have their spells fail, and then you could sort of give out spell casting armor proficiency to some classes, have it be at a feat you could pick up, so you can maybe get up to medium armor without having that chance of failure. You ton of ways you can go about it is the thing I'm trying to say, where you bring the spellcasters a bit down, so they're not just gonna stand in the middle of combat fully plated with their shield spells ready and cast spells at will, and also have cantrips that deal more damage than the martial characters can. So that's the whole martial cast divide on the martial side, and where I've not seen anything that fixes that. On the, like, how useful are we outside of combat, exploration thing, you have the issue where wizards can just have a ton of spells that completely eliminates whatever the martial character can do, the rogue can do. So you can have a knock spell, you can find traps if they fix it so they actually works. There's a ton of things that they can do that martial characters simply can't do, and they can do what the martial characters can do outside of combat even better. A lot of these spells should either be removed from the game completely, or they should be done in a way where you could cast them as a ritual maybe, but there would be a monetary cost every time it do so, and then you have some stricter wealth guidelines for the DMs to use, so they can say, okay, you can cast knock and open any lock you want, but it's going to cost you quite a lot, so it's a lot better to have a rogue in the party to do that. That's my thoughts on the martial caster divide as a whole, and why I think we're nowhere near to fixing that at all. I don't see the kind of progress that is needed to do that, basically. And another thing is the thing where they have all the spells, the features that sort of now are spells, and I really, really, really dislike it. I know I can cast the spell, so I have to go look it up in the back of the book instead of like I have this alongside my class features, because some of them are really they're just class features. Scribe scroll or scribe spell, why is that not just a class feature like it always was? It's so convoluted, it's so over-explained, whereas the same goes for these new sorcerer kind of features, where it's like, okay, you can cast this spell and then you get X spell points back and you do this other thing, which is a really convoluted way to just have a minor effect that could be a class feature that the sorcerer gets access to. So I really dislike that, and it sort of makes me nervous for what they're going to do, because it seems not great. Where does this leave us in terms of the playtest going forward? Well, Wizards of the Coast just put out a video where they talked about like what's the process now, and it seems like we're going to get the monk, we're going to get maybe one more package with a lot of tweaks and stuff, and we're going to get to have a say on that, but after that it's going to be mostly tweaks on what we've already seen. So some of the food features are going to be put back. We're going to see stuff that is closer to the 2014 version of the game instead of the playtest thing we've gotten, because all of the playtest features that didn't perform well are not going to be there. That's more or less what Jeremy Crawford says, and that's been interpreted as now all the huge changes have been presented or will be with the monk playtest package, and the rest of stuff is going to be tweaks and balance. And I don't like that, because that was my fear, that maybe if the Druid like shapeshifting thingy got such poor feedback because it was a really poorly designed feature with a very flat stat block, then they're just gonna scrap that idea and go back to, you just pick a beast with a challenge rating and here's some suggestions for that. And that would suck, because that's not great either. We didn't like that necessarily. There was a huge gap in how many options were available. There was a huge thing like, have I seen that creature? Can I become that? So that didn't work either. And you presented one idea and it was a poorly executed idea, but it was still a good idea that we did something else. And now maybe, we don't know, but maybe we're just going to scrap that and go back to whatever else we had. And that's my issue with them presenting ideas that aren't fully baked. And they're doing it again, this with the modify and create spell. I think these features could be great. I think those could be fun things. Maybe they should just be features. Maybe they can be spells, but they need to be changed in some way. But they aren't necessarily bad ideas. But if you present a good idea in a bad way, and then you take our feedback on that and say, oh, wait, people didn't like that idea at all, so we're just going to scrap that. That's such a shame and such a waste, and that's what I dislike about this playtest process, that it really feels like they haven't put enough thought into a lot of the stuff before presenting it. And that means that some good ideas are probably gonna die or have already died. And I think that's a pity and a shame. That's why I think, unfortunately, that there is some sort of flaw in the design team, whether it's the people you have, or that you don't have enough people, or you're missing that one guy who's really good at the sort of thinking about the balance and critiquing stuff, so you can make sure that you get that feedback internally before you present it. There's missing something here, and that means that the final product we're going to get is probably not going to be as great as it could have been, and that we're going to refer to it as the Player's Handbook 2024 for some reason. So anyways, those are my requested thoughts on the playtest process as it is. I can't say that I'm more enthusiastic and optimistic than I was before. I'm not saying that I won't play the new version. I think it will probably still be a better version of Dungeons & Dragons, probably. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.